and water resource regulation. And in his garden, he raises native vegetables and fruits. Dear Adam, thank you.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal as the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first people of Australia. They've never ceded sovereignty, and they remain strong in their enduring connection to land and culture.
Can you lift the microphone?
Yep, sorry. For thousands of years, Australia has been inhabited and managed sustainably. But in just 2.5 centuries since invasion, Australia has placed itself as a world leader in environmental degradation. We currently face record temperatures year on year across seasons. We're currently experiencing some of the most severe droughts on record. We've recently seen this summer the mass die-off of riverine fish populations across the state, and Australia is the world leader of modern mammalian extinction. And why is this? Of course, everyone is aware of climate change as a massive problem causing our natural environment to no longer be able to regulate itself correctly. Industrial scale carbon pollution is largely responsible for this, but climate change is as much a symptom as a cause now, and it's a symptom that is caused by intersecting environmental threats. And if there is an environmental threat that is as grand as climate change in the scale of the potential of its impacts, it's deforestation. And the reason why this is that trees are important. Forested ecosystems are critical to sustaining regional climate and ecological systems. They stabilise temperatures and they slow evaporation. They promote precipitation. The water vapour that perspires from the leaves of trees interacts with the atmosphere to create low pressure systems and bring on rain. They create healthy soil ecology and provide homes to thousands and thousands of native fauna species that are providing crucial environmental services. And importantly, for thousands of years, they provided for all the needs of the Indigenous people. And who are the culprits mainly of this environmental degradation? We're all aware of the massive impacts of mining, forestry and urban development. But it's one thing to name these beasts and another to understand the scale of their impacts. Mining accounts for 153,000 hectares of Australian land. That's roughly 1/50% of the entire continent. Intensive urban and rural residential development together account for 2.6 million hectares, or roughly 1/3% of Australia. And forestry accounts for a whopping 13.8 million hectares of Australia, 1.8% of the entire continent. Together, these three are just over 2% of Australia. But there is an activity that dwarfs these activities by an astounding margin. So we have to talk about farmers. Agricultural land in Australia accounts for 449 million hectares. That's 58% of the entire continent. Compared to conservation, which is only 36%, this is massive. And let's take a look at where that conservation land is too, because this is important. It's those purple bits. So, being an astute audience as you are, you've noticed that it's mostly desert. Actually, the areas protected for conservation and Indigenous use in Australia are largely unsuitable for agricultural activity in the sense of conventional European agriculture. I want to talk about New South Wales specifically for a bit, because New South Wales has a smaller proportion of desert than many of the larger states, and this really comes out in the land use figures and the conservation figures. Only 9% of New South Wales remains in a state considered close to natural. Compared to that, 52% is considered intact vegetation, native vegetation, which is actually highly degraded, deteriorated landscapes, primarily cleared for the use of grazing cattle on native grasslands. The remaining 39% of New South Wales doesn't contain any native vegetation community at all. Together, this 91% of land that is degraded or wholly transformed accounts for 91% of the state, and most of it is agriculture at 80% of New South Wales. But why has agriculture that produces our food become such a dangerous environmental threat in this country? And the first answer is that it harks back to invasion. Agriculture is one of the favourite colonial weapons of the European colonial powers. If there's one way to displace people from their land, it's to destroy their food source. And this is what Europeans did when they got here. They cleared vast tracts of land that Indigenous people had been managing to provide for their food and fibre, and they replaced it with a monoculture or grazing culture that was more familiar to them through their empire. Of course, there's also the modern economic system of capitalism. The modern economic system of capitalism is also to blame.
Keep the mic close.
Sorry, the private ownership and the pay-to-eat model of our society is standing in the way of a sustainable future for us. Of course, agriculture being a big industry, like any big industry, is dominated by major corporates. While there's 85,000 farm businesses in Australia, just 20 companies control 70 million hectares of Australian agricultural land. That's 15% of all Australian agriculture, and it's an area larger than France. Now, in Australia, it's not controversial to consider that any person, regardless of their means, should be able to walk into a doctor or hospital and get world-class care. Similarly, the Greens extend this to a policy for universal housing. I believe we also need a policy for universal food, where food is considered a human right and provided free to every person in Australia.
Wow.
Investment in sustainable practices simply isn't affordable for the majority of smaller agricultural enterprises. And for those large corporations, it's not even factored into their system because their main consideration is profit.
Keep the mic closer.
But we do have to eat.
This.
But we do have to eat. So I think that means we need to democratise our food. By transferring agricultural resources to public ownership or ownership by community or Indigenous cultural organisations, we can have far more input of the population into what decisions are made on how agricultural enterprises are undertaken. And once we've democratised our food, what do we do to make agriculture more sustainable? I say we completely redevelop the system more along the lines of what Indigenous people did before invasion. There are over 6,500 edible native plants in Australia. That's 20% of all endemic plants, and that doesn't even begin to account for fungi and algae. They're diverse, from fruit trees to root vegetables, green leafy vegetables. They're widespread across the entire continent, and they're resilient, found in the harshest areas of Australia's environment. And there are immense benefits to making this change. We could use multi-storey forests to make our agricultural production three-dimensional. Instead of the monoculture cropping and grazing that we have now, we could have trees surrounded by shrubs, root vegetables, climbing vines and leafy vegetables for ground cover. We would restore biodiversity through this model, providing crucial habitat for Australia's native fauna. We could sequester thousands and thousands more tonnes of carbon every year, with Australian forests being far more effective at storing carbon in the soil and in the tree organic matter than even untouched perennial grasslands, let alone raised grasslands or annual cropping. We could produce food in more extreme environments, such as the harsh deserts or saline coastal areas. And we'd create more jobs, as this would preclude a lot of the large machinery that modern agriculture uses, requiring people to actually pick fruit and food. Lastly, we really have no choice but to act on this, because climate change is happening, and if we give ourselves the time to develop the adaptation and mitigation strategies and technologies that we need to survive, we need reforestation. So much of Australia can be reforested, storing up carbon, repairing landscapes to stabilise temperatures and precipitation and return flow to rivers. We really should see this as an opportunity to create agriculture as a positive instead of detrimental environmental force in Australia, and reboot the future to create a more sustainable and fair tomorrow. Thanks.
Wow, what a wonderful vision. Thank you, Adam. I next introduce Danielle Wheeler, who is a research scientist, permaculture teacher, and she's the Greens Councillor of Western Sydney Hawkesbury Council. She chairs the Town Centre's Master Plan Working Group, the Heritage Advisory Committee, and the Animal Shelter Working Group. In her spare time, she grows fruit, flowers, ducks, and vegetables in her backyard in Wilberforce. Thank you, Danielle.
Thanks, Anne. And I'm going to lull you into a false sense of security with chalkboard images rather than... Adam and I didn't really plan what both of us were going to say today, so it's lovely that he's done all the stats and that leaves me not having to. And you can also see that I finished this presentation up the back of the room while Jeff was speaking and managed to slip in a quote from Auntie Anne, which I think is really important. What we've done with agriculture in Australia is build empires, and it's left us now with massive food and water insecurity. Yep. So I want to take you back first and acknowledge firstly that we are on Aboriginal land, that we are here on the land of the Gadigal people, and I have lived all my life on the lands of the Darug people. This is from Bruce Pascoe's book, Dark Emu. If you haven't read it, I urge you to. He talks about the grain belt of Australia, and you can see that the grain belt in the picture at the top, and I'm sorry it's a bit small, is the whole area in the centre of Australia. The grain belt that we use is two small blobs, one at the bottom of WA and one at the bottom shared between Victoria and New South Wales. Because we don't understand how to manage this country, we have ended up, I don't know why I'm so noisy, we've ended up with areas that simply don't work for us. We've drastically reduced our ability to produce food in this place. A couple of things from his book, which actually are much older quotes. On the spot are numerous mounds with short spaces between each. All these are at right angles to the slope. We'll see why this is important in the next couple of slides. And the next quote, we see Australia as this hard, old, ancient, quite hostile land. That's a modern phenomenon. The ground has been so protected by mosses and lichens, so thick that it was difficult to ride across. Horses sank into it as if it were a sponge. Is that the same country that we walk on? After the explorers arrived in Australia, we seemed to go through a period of the great forgetting where we forgot how to manage this place. One of the first people to work out how to manage this place well was someone who was local to me, P.A. Yeomans. Yeomans' brother was killed in a grass fire in Hawkesbury. And he was so concerned by what had happened that he wanted to work out a way of holding water in the soil so that they would never have grass fires of that intensity again. And he came up with a keyline design system to hold water in the landscape. Now this has gone all over the world, this system. This property, Yabani, is internationally renowned as a drought-free farm. If you want to read more of Yeoman's stuff, you can find it in Water for Every Farm and another fabulous book, which is very timely, called The City Forest. Yeomans also came up with a scale of permaculture, where he talked about scale of permanence, of what you should plant and what you should do first before you laid out other things. What Yeomans did, without realising it, was sequester an enormous quantity of carbon in the soil. So this property here is Yabani. This is what it looked like 10 years ago. You can see that there's lots and lots of water in that landscape, and the really interesting thing about Yeoman's system is that he holds water high in the landscape so that you let gravity send the water places rather than you having to pump it back up. Yeoman's is all about contours. So we had, what we had for thousands of years was Aboriginal people planting on contour to stop erosion. Then whitefellas turned up and we planted this country like it was the boggy marshlands of the UK, and the whole idea was to drain the water off. When you drain water, you drain topsoil and you drain carbon and you drain nutrients, and that's what we've done across this whole continent. Yeomans worked out that if you planted across contours, who knew, you stopped that and you held water and carbon in the soil. Now, unfortunately, Yabani has fallen victim to the urban sprawl that Adam was talking about. So this is Yabani today. Nearly 1,400 houses. Commutes 40 minutes to get to Richmond. Richmond's 5 kilometres from North Richmond. 40 minutes. 3 dams are left. This property is state heritage listed, by the way. Numerous pollution incidents into Redbank Creek. You know how we know how successful P.A. Yeomans was at holding carbon in the soil? When they started digging on that property, the topsoil ran for months down into Redbank Creek. They couldn't reach the bottom. They were trying to dig down to remove the topsoil so that they had firmer soil to build on. They couldn't find the bottom of the topsoil. That's how good P.A. Yeomans was. The council now has to charge these residents a special rate to maintain the site, and it was also the subject of a trip to ICAC. You can find the dirty dealings that brought us Redbank, that's what this is called now.
Stand back. That's right.
You can find out more about Redbank in chapter 32 of Operation Spicer. I'm a permaculturist, so I think permaculture is Australia's best export, and possibly its least known export. Permaculture is governed by 3 ethics, and they overlay really nicely with the Greens 4 pillars. They are care for the earth, care for people, and fair share of resources. It also has 12 principles. There's 4 that are really relevant to the topic of urban food and water. Use edges and value the margins, produce no waste, catch and store energy, and obtain a yield. We're now at the point where we need to urgently talk about food justice. Food is a class issue in Western countries. It is in every country. Here in lands of extreme plenty, we still have people who are vastly undernourished. They're not thin, they're not necessarily feeling hungry each night, but they are really undernourished. Because in this country, we feed poor people bad food. And poor people buy it because it's cheap, it's easy to cook, it's easy to store and prepare. If you're living in substandard circumstances, you don't have a good kitchen, you don't have great access to a farmer's market or a nice fruit and veg store, you go and try and buy fruit and veg. We've got two towns that our two major towns. Between those two towns, there's one fruit and vegetable shop, one. So if you want to buy fruit and veg, you have to go to the supermarket. If you haven't got a car...
Which two towns?
Windsor and Richmond, we've got one fruit and vegetable shop. If you haven't got a car, you're stuck at Coles and Woolies. What we've done, and Adam talked about this already, is that we've commodified food and it's destroying our ability to produce it. What we've also done is focused on telling poor people what to eat. Instead of telling big business how to produce the food that these people can and should eat, and how to give it to them in the form that they can and will eat. We're regulating the wrong things and the wrong people. The sugar tax is a prime example. Tell poor people that we'll up the cost of soft drink rather than telling big corporations to stop making it and selling it, or we'll tax you harder. So we desperately need to shift to a regenerative agriculture system. The really nice thing about regenerative agriculture and urban systems is that they require both time and labour. And people say that that's a disincentive for these systems. In an area where we now have more people than jobs, this is a great system. In an area where we desperately need a sense of community and valuable, useful, meaningful connection, and as Jeff said, with people who we don't necessarily see eye to eye with, this is a great avenue. Why grow food in cities? That's where the most fertile soil is. It's where the highest rainfall is. The eaters are already here. It's easier to harvest the waste stream to produce more food. It mitigates heat and urban runoff, and it builds communities. This is a great example of marginal agriculture. So the Hawkesbury is a traditional food producing area. We were the food bowl of the colony. We saved Sydney when they discovered that they could actually grow things in the Hawkesbury. This is Alice and her daughter Frankie. So aside from growing lots and lots of veggies, Alice has also grown Frankie over the last year or so. She's an urban farmer. She farms on a piece of flood-affected land just down the road from Yabani. She waters the produce out of the Hawkesbury River, and she sells it as boxes. So it's a community-supported agriculture. I pay every 6 weeks. I pay for 6 boxes of fruit and veg, and I go and pick them up, or Alice drops them off. 9 times out of 10, I'm running late, and she leaves it at the gate, and I pick it up at some point. This is some ways of growing food in the city. So the big picture is a food forest. You can do it in a suburban backyard. You can grow multi-layered fruit trees, insect-attracting plants, food plants, salad greens, root crops, bird-attracting plants, things that smell good, things that add to the fertility of the soil. 7 layers all at once is the food forest system. You can grow stuff on a balcony. This is the little pot up the top. That's our balcony in Abigail Boyd's office. We've got 2 pots like that. That's our salad garden. We eat from them every week. And the picture down the bottom is a very, very small portion of the Tangelo crop out of my backyard. I didn't bring any because they're too heavy, but if you come near me, I will probably give you Tangelos at this time of year. The other thing we need to do is harvest water in an urban context. The best place to hold water is not in a dam where you pump it to people. It's not in a tank where you have to use an electric pump to get it out. The best place to hold water is in the soil. Cools things down, increases fertility, increases microbial activity, and makes plants grow. This is a couple of examples from a fantastic system. This bloke's called Brad Lancaster. He lives in Arizona, where it is very, very dry and very, very hot. And he sets up rain gardens and leaky gutter systems. And they've been so successful that his town has, the equivalent of his council, has started to do this all over the town. So originally they had to hide these, and now everybody's being encouraged to put them in. So he's dropped the height of his nature strip, or verge. and he's cut into the gutter so that when the water runs down the street, instead of going off to the stormwater system, it runs in to his garden where it pools, soaks in, recharges the soil and the aquifer below it, and then any excess flows off. And it's free water. It's sheeting down the road. And he's growing a garden out of it. And you can see the one down the bottom is a much bigger system. So they're all up and down the street now. And he's taken his street from being a really hot dust bowl where no one came out during the day to this thriving community because they've managed to grow stuff. So good systems are flexible, resilient, adaptable, modular and scalable, they're diverse and they're regenerative. We have to get away from this idea of sustainability. Sustainability means staying the same as we are. And I don't know about you, but I think the way we are is pretty shit. So we need to get a whole lot better. We've got models for how to do this. We need to start using them. One of the things that we do, I think, is that we regulate the wrong things. We regulate the bottom. We regulate what people can do at home. We don't regulate what businesses can do on a broader scale. And we need to change that. If you're in a position of being able to regulate, or as Greens members, you can guide a local councillor in how they regulate, you need to start asking yourself, why are you regulating this? So verge gardens are a really good example. Why would you stop people planting stuff on their nature strip when they can probably just do it? Why would you have a policy for something when people could just get on and do it? Only make a policy if you're trying to stop somebody doing something bad. Growing food is not bad. Will regulating make it better, or will it come back to bite you? If you make a policy about what people can grow on their verge gardens, how long before some maniac tweaks it so that you can't grow oranges there because they might fall on a small child? Ask yourself, am I acting out of hope or fear? And remember that one size doesn't fit all. So my council doesn't have a verge garden policy. We're really comfortable with that. Wollongong Council had to get a verge garden policy up because they had to ram it past their staff so that they stopped telling people they couldn't grow food on the nature strip. Sometimes you have to adapt to the circumstances you've got. And I'm going to leave you with the ultimate food and water regulator. This is my duck, Jemima. If you haven't got your water systems right and you get a duck, you'll know about it because they want clean water all the time. And then the water that you give them, if you don't give it to them and that they poop in, they do everything in the water, and I mean everything. Jemima's just got a new friend, and it seems I might take Jemima to Mardi Gras next year because there's been a great coming out in the yard. She's very happy. They do that in the pond as well. If she's not happy, she'll let you know about it. She's great fun, she's lovely, but she makes me work harder at how my systems work because if I don't do it right the first time, she just makes me more work down the track. And that's what we've got to do. What we've done here is engineer a system that doesn't work and it ties us up in knots and it leaves us miserable, and we need to change that. Thank you.
Now, our last speaker in this session, I'm just picking my notes, is Bruce Shillingsworth. He's actually going to start with a video. Is that correct, Bruce?
Yeah, I'm going to introduce myself first.
Yep, okay. So I'll hand over to Bruce, but Bruce is a Murrawari and Budjiti man, artist, cultural educator, and he's also a Water for the Rivers activist. His country is in northwest New South Wales riverlands, which are the ones that have been devastated by the water stealing by the big cotton farmers and irrigators. In October of this year, Bruce is bringing together communities along the river in a corroboree to unite people to solve this unprecedented crisis. We are very privileged to introduce Bruce. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for giving us this opportunity to be able to talk. But there's some important things that we need to talk about. I believe that this is the time in history. It is time. We are in a great chapter in history now that we can make a difference. We are standing in the gaps between our old people and our younger generation and the future to come. So it's our responsibility as people now to be able to look after the things that looks after us. It takes care of us, it sustains us. And that's Mother Earth, which is so important. And our natural resources, the water, the rivers, the air we breathe, the food we eat. Our previous speaker spoke about that. But I want to speak about that a little bit more and how it affects First Nation people later on after we watch this clip about the rivers. The Ochre Pits, very special place for ceremony. The Aboriginal people from all the groups around this area would come here and they'd get the ochre, the yellow, the white, the red and the pink. They would paint their bodies. The colours would represent a particular group. They'd put them on and then they'd walk up toward the fish traps on the banks there on the big plains. They'd have dances, ceremonies and corroborees and they'd tell their stories. And they talk about the water and why it's so important. The river is life, and that's what brought our people together. Well, here we are in the Darling River. It's empty at the moment, there's no water. This river's in big trouble. We need your help desperately. We need our rivers to survive, to sustain us, and to look after us. So right along the river here, along the riverbed, there's all this dead freshwater mussel shells. How Aboriginal people used to heat the mussel. We used to cook it on the fire, we used to roast it, we used to make curry. You know, it was nutrition, it was good for our body. It gives us protein, it gives us lots of energy. But this is an example of how, things are dying in our rivers and how desperate it is. I'm here calling for our people out there, First Nation people, to come together and supporting us here in Biwarna. Get the water back in the river. To let our rivers run freely. We need ceremonies. We need dances. We need rainmakers to make it rain. We need special lawmen. Sing the land. Talk to the spirit. We need our stories and our knowledge to be told again. We need to heal our country through the spirit. Call on Byami, our great spirit. Yeah, this 4 Mile Reserve is a great fishing spot and also a great swimming spot. A lot of the people, the Neembar people and the Whale One people would come here and they'd camp on the side of the river. They'd make their fires and they'd fish for days, and that's what when they catch their fish, they'd cook it up on the banks and they share it with the other tribes. Certain times a year you're not allowed to swim here because we believe that the Mundagata, the rainbow snake, had came here in this very camp. He stayed in the waterhole. That's why it's so deep. And now people don't come to the riverbank anymore because there's nothing here. Our rivers have been polluted. Our stories, our Dreamtime stories have been passed down for years. Hasn't been told here. This is a special place. I want to call on the Noongar people over west. I want to talk about the Kuris here, the Murrays from Queensland. I want to call on the Walpri mob. I want to call on Pitjantjatjara. I want to call on the mob in the Kimberleys. I want to call on the people down in the Yorta Yorta country, down south. Murawari people, Barkindji people, Kamilaroi people, Yarralaroi, Whale One, Neempa, Barrabinya. Those nations that spread out over Australia, we call on you to come and help us. We need to bring it together. And this would be a nice spot because it's like a sandy, we call it the sandy bank, where my children learn to swim. But we need a gathering of people from all nations to come here in Biwarna, where people used to gather for thousands of years. We want all our tribes, all our nations to come here. Support the local people. Support our rivers. Mum was born under an old tree on the edge of the desert, like people lived for thousands and thousands of years. I spoke to Mum this morning on the phone like I do every weekend, and she had some sad news. She said my legs are just about buggered. My hips are now finished. Mum was very healthy. She was strong. She's now in her 90s. She walked the land. She lived on the rivers. She camped on the rivers. She lived off those natural foods that we get from our river at the moment. But get back to Mum's story. Her story tells our story. And Mum said, Mum's getting sick. We see the rapid pace of our people out there that are getting sick, that are dying. My mother's mother lived to over 100. Those whole people lived a healthy life. Last year I visited Mum during Christmas and she was very strong. She was still doing the things. But when the rivers went, her health went downhill. Like I said, she used to gather on those rivers, she used to fish. There was no river to fish. There was no river to go camping on. There was no rivers to pass those stories on to our next generation. This is how it affects First Nations people. Our sacred sites along the rivers are slowly disappearing because of the rivers disappearing. How can we tell our stories about the river when our kids can't see it visually? How do we teach our kids to swim when there's no water in the river? How do we bring back those 50-year-old cods, the ecosystem, the aquatic life, the animals in those rivers that brought my mother food for lots of years? The rain, the water that replenishes the earth, that brings plant, the natural fruits, and the vegetation and the vegetables and nuts and berries that sustained our people for thousands of years. Now it's all gone. But here's a lesson. Look at what we're doing in our own lives, in our own environment. Climate change. The rapid pace we're going at to destroy ourselves and destroying this planet of ours. There's no plan B at the moment. We can't go nowhere else. What do we do about it? What do we do about it? I believe the answer's here with us. We will make a difference. We will change the environment we live in. We will make those accountable for the things that they have done wrong. We as a generation now are going to stand up and we're going to say enough's enough. Yeah. We will unite here in this continent of ours and fix our problems because we don't rely on the government. And we know that we'll get nothing from the government. The energy is going to come from us, grassroots people, people that knows our communities, that cares about our communities, and that'll help each other in times of need. And this is the most important time in need, and we need to get together and in solidarity, and let's take them on. Let's challenge these things. Thank you, everyone. Just one more thing about the big corroboree. If you haven't got it, it's out there, I think. In September, we're going to hit the river towns, Walgett, Reboot, Wilcannia, We're going to have the biggest gathering, the biggest corroborees I've ever seen. And we're going to send the message right across Australia and right across the world. I hope everyone can come along. Yeah. Thank you.
Site, when you learn that in the last year alone, that 86% of the water that's been taken from the Murray-Darling massive system has been taken by 10 landowners. Right? And it's been taken in the last 12 months, despite the fact that the flows have been so low. You can read about this because it's been written about in places like The Guardian, and I think Jeff Sparrow was one of the people who wrote about this. But we need to acquaint ourselves with these facts so that we can actually take on what is the real culprit here, it seems to me, and that is big capital. We're not talking about the family farm, we're not talking about small landholders, we're talking about big capital, which is taking this water to the detriment of all of the communities up and down the length of that massive system. Okay, so it's over to you.
I just wanted to thank the speakers because I think what we had here was a reflection of a diversity of thoughts and ideas about food and land use and the way in which the Australian landscape has been devastated by corporations and grazing cattle and sheep in a totally inappropriate environment. What I wanted to do is link it back to the earlier session this morning where we talk about participative democracy, and I think this is a really fantastic example of how we need to think about things both at the local level and participation in our local communities, as well as sort of the broader questions about choices in terms of how we use land in a bigger system of agriculture, and what the question of how does agriculture contribute to the regenerative nature or regenerative future of Australia rather than to profit. And so I guess that would be my idea about how we think about these things, and also to link it back to, if we're thinking about participative democracy, that's us and our communities participating at a local level and making decisions at a local level.
Thank you.
The Greens offer to buy back land on, say, starting with the most degraded land out west, towards the centre, or would we try to persuade farmers to change over to, say, native crops? And what I'm thinking about is in North Queensland there was a banana grower who went organic, and it was considered insane. The guy who puts his bananas in with red wax, I don't know what it's called, but anyway, so apparently that's now become mainstream, and he's changed his own, one guy who changed his own industry. So,
My question is probably generally towards government practice. Recently I heard about New South Wales state government possibly looking at selling off state forests to private enterprise. To me, a lot of what's been said today has been focusing on a lot of negative aspects of what's happening, which that's very valid. However, I think we really need to have the mindset of the positive outcomes and how we can encourage a positive transition. Does anybody have an opinion on, where that could possibly lead in terms of state forests, possibly leading into a more sustainable way of growing food for the nation?
Yeah, look, the real answer is you need to start giving the land back to the First Nation people. And then you need to start working with those First Nation communities to support in whatever you want to do. The land has got to return back to First Nations people, all right? And Jane's question, buying the land, it is great, but who are you buying the land off? Good, and they can take it back, steal it back again whenever they want. So my opinion is, and you need to give it back to First Nation people and work with it.
Yes, I absolutely agree. We need to give the land back to First Nations people. I'd like to see government policy facilitating that. But in the meantime, we do have a pretty poor government. And something that we can do and look at as individuals is forming cooperatives, non-profit cooperatives, to pull our resources together, pull our campaigning capacity together to attain land, and then put First Nations people in charge of managing that land.
Do you want us to do all the questions at once?
Yep.
Anne? Good. Look, I agree. Australia used, in the early days of the colony, the Squattocracy was founded on the idea that land should be in the hands of people who could work it and knew what to do with it. Now, stupidly at the time, the government thought that clear-felling white settlers who would graze sheep on land that within 7 years became desert was an example of people who knew what to do with it. What we know now, 150 years later, is that their definition of use and know what to do with was wrong. But there's still this attitude of giving land to people. Well, we've got people who know how to use that land. We've got people who know what to do with it. And we've got 200 years of examples of the land being in the hands of people who actually got no bloody idea what to do with it. So there's a pretty good premise for taking it back, I think, and giving it to First Nations people who will actually do something productive. There are also some really, really good examples of forest producing systems in the UK, and we're really slow to catch on to that in Australia. So if you look at people like Ben Law in the UK who manages a working forest where it produces quite a lot of food, largely hazelnuts and chestnuts, but also a lot of timber for housing. They're beautiful bespoke buildings. He's been on Grand Designs, which should be no recommendation for anybody, but you can have a look at Ben Law's work on Grand Designs. But they are forests they're working forests. Our state forests are supposed to be working forests, and in fact they're not at all. They're just another piece to exploit, and that's how we use them. This is just a sop to the National Party, and it should be avoided at all costs. I think it shows that Liberal National Coalition is starting to come apart at the seams, and the more we pick at those threads, the better. How can this work? I think we can persuade farmers to change. David Holmgren, one of the co-originators of permaculture, says that the best way to make people change their mind is not to go and tell them that we're wrong. And I think we do this a lot as Greens. We go and we talk at people with an endless string of facts, and we say, you're wrong and we're right because 15 pages of research later, you should do what we're doing. And we know that doesn't work. Like, it works in a few pockets, like Newtown, doesn't work in Western Sydney where I come from. Holmgren has this theory, and he calls it, look over here, we're having fun. If we make this look like it's successful, and that's what's happened with that banana grower, it's what happened with Peter Andrews, it's what's happened with farmers all over the nation, where they've farmed in a regenerative way, and all of a sudden, particularly when times of crisis hit, like the drought, people are looking at them going, why have they got water? Why are they not in the massive levels of debt that I'm in? And that's the easier way to change people's minds. When that fails, or when you're at a point of crisis, then you have to regulate. But until then, you're much better to bring people along than to beat them in the path ahead of you. The participatory democracy stuff and how agriculture contributes, what community-based agriculture lets you do, community gardens, permaculture groups. So I know Phil and Annie through Permaculture Sydney West, not through the Greens. That was a sideline for us, you'd be surprised to know. That's where you get, Peter Cundall calls it play it straight and infiltrate. It's where you get to stand side by side with people with a common thing, which is growing food, and talk about all the other stuff. So talk about politics, talk about religion, talk about all those things that you can't normally talk about because you're sharing a love for growing something, and that bonds you, and that makes it much easier to have that conversation.
I think we need to stop saying that we're talking about climate change. I think we need to start saying it's a war on climate change and make it real. Our first leader said that during World War II, they made a big deal out of it, and we got something done quickly. If we don't start calling this a war on climate change, we won't get anything done.
Maybe Boris can answer that. In any treaties with First Nation communities, how can we ensure that, you said, give the land back to the First Nation people, how can we ensure the food security practices in place?
I'd like to thank all the speakers. This is really personal and important to me. I'm a migrant. My family's on the US. My family is mostly dying of malnutrition related poor diet issues. It's killing younger people than it should be at major health risk. A lot of my concern with sustainable agriculture and the way we talk about it is we're blaming people for not buying healthier things. And Danielle already mentioned that a little bit, so I'd like to thank Danielle for talking about that. How can we be supporting people, including people who are all in regional areas? And how do we see tying it to other social justice campaigns like rental rights? Because one of my issues out here, I worked for a little while in property management. I didn't fit in very well, but I wrote up a lot of leases where we explicitly were either tormenting low-income renters into maintaining gardens that did nothing, like lawns and bushes and stuff that did nothing, or we were telling people with balconies that they were not allowed, or they were in trouble, or they owed us extra money for having a pot plant on their balcony. And I was just, and I'm serious, these were vulnerable people who did not all have access to community gardens. I really support community gardens. I love that kind of idea. But what sort of things can we be doing to be helping the people who are most impacted now by the kind of agriculture and distribution of healthy things that we have?
I think, why are we pushing a treaty? We need to have that agreement between First Nation people and the Australian government. I believe if we sign a treaty or an agreement with our First Nation people, we will be better off in the state we're in today. Because First Nation people know the land. They lived in for thousands and years. Now it's time that we need to work together, not separately. We need to come together, work with our First Nation people. They know the land, they know the food source, the bush food out there that we can eat, that we can survive on because they lived on it for thousands of years, and healthy and live longer. I believe if we sign an agreement with First Nation people, your children, your grandchildren, can afford a house and can afford a place to live. And can live on the land freely. And we can coexist together. So a treaty and some sort of agreement needs to happen. We need to smash the structure of Western society and culture that we're living in at the moment. I'm sad to say that, but we need to do it. We need to separate ourselves from what's been controlling us throughout history and the elite that are now controlling our waters, our foods, and our natural environment. We need to wake up, we need to stand up and say, look, give it back to First Nation people and we will start working with you. We don't want to destroy the Commonwealth, but we want to support the Commonwealth to bring it together. It's very important.
In terms of how we ensure that there's the adequate food management practices in place, I think it comes back to the democracy that has been a theme all through today. People need to be involved at a direct sort of level with the structures that are producing food. And so if we're handing back the management of land to First Nations people, that means that everyone else has to be involved and speaking with First Nations people about how that's done. In terms of supporting people in Western Sydney and similar regions and renters, we absolutely need to change the law so that renters have the right to grow food on properties in balconies. And there are foods, there are fruits and leafy vegetables that can grow on balconies. We need to allow people to do that. We need to allow people to plant in their gardens. And I think it would be helpful to open up public spaces for more community gardening of vegetables and fruits, as well as providing seedlings and food plants to people for free to plant in their streets and to plant in their gardens.
Thanks. I'll start with the comments on the language around climate change. There is concern that if we start to talk about a war, and even the talk of a climate emergency, that not only does it mobilise us, language is a really powerful tool for mobilising people, we know that as a political party. Not only does it mobilise us, but it also mobilises the right. So it mobilises them to attack us, but it also mobilises some of the real nutters that are on the right who then start using it to ramp up the racism rhetoric. So we're having a climate emergency and we've not got enough water, so we can't let anybody else in because this is ours. It's for nice white people and nobody else can come. And that's what comes out of some of this emergency talk. So we have to balance it. We have to be using it to get us moving and to help us change systems. But it has to be a positive change. We're now at that delightful post-truth state where you can say whatever the hell you want on social media and you'll be surrounded by a sea of like-minded nutters who will back you into a position of power. We've seen that. We've seen it over and over again. Unfortunately, the left wing are not quite as ready to follow us into the war, and that's a bit of a shame. I'll leave the treaty stuff to Uncle Bruce, but I think it really speaks to the question about food security, really speaks to the idea that we have to have a just transition. We can't have treaties without dealing with what happens after the treaty as well. It's not enough to say to people, well, you wanted your land, you wanted your rights, off you pop. Because we've had 230 years of dispossession and intergenerational trauma that we now need to set up a transition from. So if we can have a just transition for miners, we can have a just transition for First Nations people as well. I agree with Josie, we need to stop blaming people for not buying healthy food. If you've got $50 to buy food for your family for the week, you are not buying salmon and small packets of spinach. You're buying sausages, potatoes and white bread. And if you've got a bit left over, you're buying tomato sauce as your vegetable allocation. That's the reality of poverty. And you're going home and you're cooking it in your one pan where the PFAS coating is peeling off, and you're boiling buggery out of those vegetables because that's all you've got. That's why I say stop talking about what poor people should be eating and start regulating from the top down, not from the bottom up. If I hear one more person who goes on an overseas holiday tell me that poor people, that we should tax soft drink, I might not be a very nice person for very long. And I'm probably not a very nice person most of the time. Poor people buy soft drink because it's cheap, it's nice, and it's something they can give their kids that they can actually afford. It might be the one bright spot in the shopping trip, a trip that is filled with anxiety about whether they can actually pay for what's in their trolley or whether they're going to die of embarrassment and leave the shop with nothing. Don't talk about putting up the price of their one treat while you're worrying about buying your 5th pair of shoes. Start thinking, we need to have these conversations about poor people or we will never make any inroads into proper systems change. They're not others. They are us, and they're the very people we should be fighting for. Rental rights is the same. We're regulating the wrong stuff. If you let a tenant plant in your garden or have a dog or have chickens or have a kid, they'll stay in your house longer. And that will be 4 weeks every year that you're not missing out on rent. I think it's a no-brainer. I've got a rental property. I'm a good capitalist. Our tenants have been there for 5.5 years. They've got chooks in the backyard. The first thing he said to me, they're from Tonga, the first thing the father said to me was, can I rip out all those stupid flowers? We had some plumbago growing up to hide the daggy fence. Can I rip out all those stupid flowers and grow taro? Please. Please grow taro. It doesn't cost me anything. 5.5 years they've been in that house. That's 5.5 years where I have had a rental income every week. Seems easy to me. Community gardens are most successful in areas with high density, very multicultural populations and people of low socioeconomic standing. Not because these people are desperate to grow fruit and vegetables, because these are the people who are really good at growing fruit and vegetables. Community gardens struggle in areas like mine where everybody has a 1/4 acre block and never speaks to anybody. So community gardens work really well in just the areas where they're most vital, and that's really nice. That's a thing that actually works, which is good.
We have got time for more comments. One thing I'd actually like to add to the discussion myself is that, look, we have a population of 25 million in this country. It's a food exporting country because, in fact, in certain areas we grow vast quantities of rice and wheat. These are important on the world market, particularly since the world grain supplies are increasingly fraught by climate change. The shortage of grain and the effective droughts in both Africa and the Middle East have been one of the prompts to war in those areas. I wonder, can we really overturn capitalist agriculture in Australia of that nature when what is produced here is important in the world market? I mean, it's one thing for us to say in Australia, can we force a revolution here and say access to food is a right? But how do we deal with the fact that this is a global market in which food supplies are one of the weapons of the rich and the powerful against the poor? Other questions?
So just the point maybe about complacency of people who live in the city, our water supply, Warragamba Dam, is being undermined by long or coal mining. Yep. And is very seriously at risk now, and I compliment all those who might be here who've been engaged in that campaign. But it's something to keep in mind, we're all threatened by this risk. It's not just people who live in the West and are suffering most severely at the moment. Most of our dams are down to maybe almost halfway and rapidly diminishing in their volumes. So we're all under threat, and the quality of that water is suffering continuously. The more people buy bottled water, which costs more than petrol, and the plastic bottle costs more than the water in it, which is probably not as good quality as the tap water that we could drink, is threatening the continued supply of good quality drinking water to people in metropolitan Sydney. We have had disasters, obviously, in many country areas in terms of losing their water supply altogether. Cape Town was a particularly notable instance of a major city suffering in that regard. So I think it's really important that we all examine our lifestyles and lead by example. I think there's great potential for people to grow their own Indigenous food in their backyard. We've certainly started doing that and connecting with Aboriginal people. There are great opportunities for community gardens, as Daniel said. Anyone who's got a connection in local government should be lobbying their local councillors, I'd suggest, that we have more community gardens and that be promoted locally to provide good quality food. And where you haven't got the opportunity to that, I'd encourage you to look at buying organic food from a variety of suppliers who desperately need income to continue providing good quality organic food from the fringes of the city at the moment. So there are a lot of opportunities, not buying, but not wasting ourselves. Our water, we're very wasteful in the city. I'm wasteful too. I need to conserve water a lot better than what I do. But there's lots of ways we can address these problems and tell other people what we're doing, encourage them to follow the lead. So any further comments on that would be welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that those of you who live in the city are very sheltered from the current drought. I couldn't tell you how bad it is. Even we're de-stocking, and we've mostly got native pasture, but we do have to buy water for them to drink.
Where are you from?
De-stocking. I'm from Copeland, that nobody's probably ever heard of, in the Gloucester area.
Right. Thank you.
Very big, successful, regenerative farmers have de-stocking. Some people are just storing the semen and whatnot, because their breeding stock have got to go. You can't keep hand feeding and buying in water. And we're so dry, the native plants are starting to die in the bush. Now the fires are going to be horrific. We've got no water to fight fire with. I tell you, we don't get a shower every day in my place. And if you haven't finished your cup of tea, what's left goes out on the plant. There's no wasting water. But it's really, really sad what's happening. And even the native grass is looking a bit troubled. They'll come back, and the bits between will if it ever rains. But New South Wales is going to be so short of cattle and sheep stock, you won't get meat in the shops in the next year or two. It will be so expensive, and I know pets won't be eating meat because you won't be able to afford it, and the poor most certainly won't. They'll have to eat some old crap. It's so bad, and when the fires come, there's no water in many country towns to fight any fires at all. Nothing, because we barely got enough to drink.
I'll go first, Mr.
Okay, look, thank you for that report. Okay, I'll give our three speakers their last words in response to the comments and questions we've had. I'm going to say that thank you very much. This has been incredibly instructive. I hope that our speakers will make their presentations available so that we can actually put them up on the Reboot website for people to access, because I'm sure people would really appreciate having them. Okay, who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Unless you want, do you want to go, Bruce? So I'm quite humbled by that last speaker, and I sort of feel like we probably should have had you up here to talk about what it actually looks like on the ground, because you're right, we are really, really insulated from this. So I live on the edge of the urban area. We've had a system going, we treat some of our own sewage in the Hawkesbury, and we've had a system, it was a notice of motion that I put up, was an urgency motion that I put up, that we sell that, so normally we sell that silage to whoever wants it at a profit, and it pays to keep our sewage treatment plant going. We introduced last year a system where we sold that fodder at cost to local farmers to keep their cattle going, because they were paying $250 a bale for hay, and it was coming from South Australia. Now that's not sustainable, and that's not a sensible closed loop system. We produce waste. We've got towns that everybody uses the toilet. We produce waste. That waste grows lucerne. It's a really high quality product, and it can be fed as silage to cattle. It's ludicrous that would. Everybody else here, all your waste, all your fertility, the product of everything that you eat is going out to the ocean, and all the water with it. It's not a grand system, is it? Small closed loop systems is what will save us, and we have to start transitioning to them. That loss of breeding stock is really frightening, I think, and that will mean that farmers simply can't recover. Anne's comments on food export. We export three times the amount of food that we consume in this country. We export. So if we produce 4 things, we export 3 and consume 1 here. The biggest problem with our export of food is that all of that food requires water to grow, and sometimes it requires outrageous amounts of water to grow. We need to stop eating rice in this country. We need to only grow it in areas that naturally flood. We should not be growing it in areas where we have to ship water to irrigate frantically. It will require a change of diet. We cannot continue to export rice either. The driest continent on earth cannot continue to export 2 water-hungry crops, water and cotton. It's lunacy. We have to stop it. Again, there needs to be a transition. And we need to stop exporting wine as well. Barrels and barrels and barrels of water go into every single bottle of wine. We need to stop exporting it. It's not a necessity. I know some of you think it is. It's not. Longwall coal mining, really briefly. We have the only water catchment in the world that is not protected from mining. Good one, Sydney. Good one. Water restrictions and bottled water. More water is used to produce the plastic bottle than the bottle can hold. Triumph of human ingenuity. Glen Innes, Armidale, all running out of water. Kate Fairman attempted a notice of motion that New South Wales moves to level 3 restrictions. We'll wait and see what happens. I'm not hopeful. But we need to. It's ludicrous. And when we restrict people's water, we need to stop to tell them, I don't know why we have to tell people not to hose the driveway. I mean, come on. But we also need to stop, we need to say to people, you can't stand under the shower for 20 minutes. You can't. Is your household using 500 litres of water a day? Then bloody well stop it. Water is too cheap. Really, it's too cheap. Reasonable limit at a cheap price. Anything over 200 litres a day, bad luck. Pay through the nose.
So to start with Anne's comments on the global need for food.
Please speak closer to the mic.
Sorry. Starting with Anne's comments on the global need for food, Australia's native species can actually help with this. There are a lot of native Australian plants that make excellent replacements for some of the most popular global foods like wheat. Australia has a lot of perennial native grains. So you can plant these, the roots continue to grow in the soil year on year, and you can continue to take the grains off them. Whereas with wheat, you've got to dig it up every year and re-till. We could be turning this into flour and exporting it to the rest of the world. Similarly, we have green leafy vegetables that grow in drought conditions, and a lot of Australia's native foods do grow in these drought conditions. They have low water requirements. They'll be able to exist in a dormancy through extremes of heat and extremes of low water. And so there's really an opportunity here to export these to the rest of the world, and also sort of set a unique food culture that we can sell that's different from what everyone else is providing. In terms of the regional areas suffering the most, this sort of goes back to the fact that the areas that are conserved that still have forests on them aren't in these regional areas, and we're seeing now the compounding impacts of climate change and the regional climate instability occurring due to the lack of the forested areas, and it's hitting those regional people the hardest first. Sydney's sort of protected in that there's this area of mountains around the edge of Sydney that's not really suitable for conventional agriculture, and so it hasn't been cleared as much, and we're still getting a lot of those environmental benefits from that. And I think it is urgent that we do start to encourage landholders in regional areas to reforest. We need to provide them with the resources to do so that we can stabilise those climates there, because it's going to get worse if we don't.
Look, First Nation people have been saying this for years and years, especially our old people. When you're starting to see the visual stuff that they spoke about hundreds of years ago, and now we're faced with it, and now we've got to fix it. I believe that the land needs to be restored back to the natural way it was. It needs to be able to get the natural cycle, especially the water cycle, and everything on it the way it was. That's for the survival of us as people living on this one planet. We don't know how much impact that the earth, Mother Nature, have on us. Why are we cutting down the trees that gives us oxygen? Why are we doing it? Why are we clearing the land? Over the last 200 years, hundreds of our animals are becoming extinct or have been extinct. I feel sad because this is the environment our children are going to grow up into and see the things around us. They won't see these natural things. We talk about food and we talk about water. They're important. So I believe that First Nation people need to be in the part of decision making in everything we do. The land needs to be given back to First Nation people. Because who's owned the land, who's controlling the land, who's controlling your lives and treating you like slaves? We're going to stop supporting the people that's killing us. That's killing our environment. That are destroying it. Wake up. Now it's time. It is time. Thank you.